Hello. It is noon o'clock on 11/23/2023. That's November 23rd. I would like to welcome you today to another Edgar Allan Poe reading. Today will be, hold on, echo. I would like to welcome you today to another, there's one echo fixed. Let's make sure we have the other echo fixed. Nah. That should be fixed. If anybody is available to tell me whether or not my sound is good, go ahead and do so. If not, I'm going to continue anyway to build ambiance for just a moment and see if I can learn how today, while I am live, to share a screen with you. Before we begin today's readings, I'm going to share some notes from the Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore on current events and writings that may have influenced these dialogues. So, step 1. Grab your snacks, smoke, whatever it is you like, and let's try to share a screen. Okay, we're going to skip some of the smaller notes here. The conversation of Eiros and Charmion. This is the first of what may be called Poe's Platonic Dialogues Between Spirits in Heaven. The others are the Colloquy of Manos and Una and the Power of Words. They have been much admired by some critics. I don't know this name here. It's Diukink. Included all three among the dozen stories he chose for Poe's Tales of 1845 and Alphonse Smith Poe, How to Know Him, 1921, page 295, called them soaring meditations that compass life and death, the natural and the supernatural, the arches that span the spaces between. The conversation of Eiros and Charmion was popular enough to be translated into French in Poe's lifetime by Isabelle, I'm not going to say that name, and this is in French, blah, 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 blah. The subject, the destruction of the world by fire as prophesied in the Bible, has often occupied both serious divines and fanatics. In the 1830s, it was of special interest to Americans. William Miller of Lowhampton, Washington County, New York, announced in 1831 that the world's end would occur in 1843 and impressed increasing numbers of followers throughout the decade. In 1833, there were showers of meteors and later a succession of comets. Many people in all ages have regarded comets with fear and perhaps as forerunners of the world's end. Poe speculated about how the comet might be its cause. He apparently took his own ideas fairly seriously when he wrote this tale, for in his little sketch called A Prediction in 1848, he remarks on changing his earlier hypothesis. In Poe's day, comets aroused far greater popular interest than in the last half-century, when no really important comet has appeared. In the early 19th century, several were seen. There was a very brilliant comet in 1811. The famous Halley's Comet returned in 1835, and there was much discussion of Encke's Comet because, although it has no tail and is so small that it can be seen with the naked eye only under the most favorable conditions, its periodicity had been calculated, and it had returned in 1833 and 1838 and was expected again in 1842. The excitement of 1838 called forth a story that almost certainly set Poe to thinking. This is The Comet by S. Austin Jr. I did go to look for this story, The Comet by S. Austin Jr., and could not find it. In it, Austin describes the discovery of a comet, the disputes of astronomers, the excitement of press and people, and philosophical discussions when it becomes known that the visitant must strike the Earth. At last, the comet is seen as of huge size and stirs up tremendous tides that overwhelm humanity. Poe decided that Austin's machinery would not work. In view of the known tenuosity of comets, it is doubtful if one ever stirred a tide commensurable by man. Furthermore, the biblical prophecies promise that there will be no second flood, but call for the destruction of the world by fire. Poe in 1829 called comets carriers of the fire in Al-Aaraaf. Yeah, it's just page numbers and such. We're going to maybe get to that reading today. He must have read in proof a review of the Southern Literary Messenger, April 1836, called Slavery in the United States, in which Judge Beverly Tucker wrote of a comet that it might prove the messenger of that dispensation which, in the end of all things, is to wrap our earth in flames. Poe also seems to have consulted Thomas Dix, Christian Philosopher, 1823, from which the following extracts are pertinent. The atmosphere is now ascertained to be a compound substance formed of two very different ingredients, termed oxygen gas and nitrogen gas. Of 100 measures of atmospheric air, 21 are oxygen and 79 nitrogen. The one, namely, oxygen, is the principle of combustion and the vehicle of heat, and is absolutely necessary for the support of animal life, and is the most powerful and energetic agent in nature. The other is altogether incapable of supporting either flame or animal life. Were we to breathe oxygen air without any mixture or alloy, our animal spirits would be raised, and the fluids in our bodies would circulate with greater rapidity, but we would soon infallibly perish by the rapid accumulation of heat in the animal frame. If the nitrogen were extracted from the air, and the whole atmosphere contained nothing but oxygen or vital air, combustion would not proceed in that gradual manner which it now does, but with the most dreadful and irresistible rapidity. Should the Creator issue forth his almighty fiat, let the nitrogen of the atmosphere be completely separated from the oxygen, and let the oxygen exert its native energies without control wherever it extends. From what we know of its nature, we are warranted to conclude that instantly a universal conflagration would commence throughout all the kingdoms of nature. We're going to skip through some of this. Poe's story was presumably written about October or November 1839. A few years after its first printing, it became timely for republication. The Great Comet of 1843 was first observed on February 28th and was kept under observation until April 19th. It was extremely bright in March and passed less than one solar radius above the Earth's surface. Its tail was the longest on record, 200 million miles, about twice the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Poe inserted his story with a new title in the Philadelphia Saturday Museum of April 1st, 1843. The date may be significant. I think we're gonna maybe we should read this little bit on the destruction of the world. We invite attention to the singular article on another page entitled The Destruction of the World. It details an imaginary conversation supposed to occur between two departed spirits at a period subsequent to the great catastrophe, which few doubt will, at some future epoch, take place. The views embodied in this conversation are in strict accordance with philosophical speculation. The danger to be apprehended from collision with a comet is, to be sure, very little, and from the gaseous nature of these erratic bodies, it has been contended that even actual contact would not have a fatal result. But the purport of the article in question seems to be the suggestion of a mode in which, through the cometary influence, the destruction of the Earth might be brought about, and brought about in accordance with prophecy. From the celestial visitant now present, we have, of course, nothing to fear. It is now receding from the earth with a rapidity absolutely inconceivable, and in a very short period will be lost, and perhaps forever, to human eyes. But it came unheralded, and tomorrow its counterpart, or some wonder even more startling, may make its appearance. A firm reliance upon the wisdom and goodness of the deity is by no means inconsistent with a due sense of the manifold and multiform perils by which we are so fearfully environed. Blah, 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 blah. And that is where we will end that bit. If anyone is around, could you tell me if I have made it back to the screen myself? Am I back? I hope that wasn't too terribly dull of a reading, but I think that the appearance of celestial bodies in our skies is pertinent to what's happening today as we look at what may be Nibiru or some other body hiding up there in our skies that they are trying to obfuscate our vision of. We are, however, going to enjoy smoking and such today. I will be playing the role of Eiros in today's first reading, The Conversation of Eiros and Charmion. And I will also be playing the role of Charmion. Charmion. Yes, this will be he or she. I don't really know. So, let's begin. Oh, Grandmother Spider, it's time for a smoke. You darling, what have you brought me? Oh, my. Oh, Grandmother. Thank you, Grandmother. The gifts never stop from the moon. Oh, joy, joy, joy. Let us smoke. And we will begin our reading. Hello, I'd like to say hello to Just JP, Terry King, and 007. Thank you for showing up and stopping by to say hello. Perhaps you will enjoy today's stories while you are preparing some feast with your family, or perhaps you're just chilling by yourself like me-self today. Either way, let us begin. Why do you call me Eiros? So henceforth you will always be called. You must forget, too, my earthly name, and speak to me as Charmion. This is indeed no dream. Dreams are with us no more, but of these mysteries anon. I rejoice to see you looking lifelike and rational. The film of the shadow has already passed from off your eyes. Be of heart and fear nothing. Your allotted days of stupor have expired, and tomorrow I will myself induct you into the full joys and wonders of your novel existence. True, I feel no stupor, none at all. The wild sickness and the terrible darkness have left me, and I hear no longer that mad, rushing, horrible sound, like the voice of many waters. Yet my senses are bewildered, Charmion, and with the keenness of their perception of the new. A few days will remove all this, but I fully understand you and feel for you. It is now 10 earthly years since I underwent what you undergo, yet the remembrance of it hangs by me still. You have now suffered all of pain, however, which you will suffer in Iden. Iden? I may be mispronouncing that. I apologize. In Iden. Oh God, pity me, Charmion. I am overburdened with the majesty of all things, of the unknown now known, of the speculative future merged in the august and certain present. Grapple not now with such thoughts. Tomorrow we will speak of this. Your mind wavers, and its agitation will find relief in the exercise of simple memories. Look not around, nor forward, but back. I am burning with anxiety to hear the details of that stupendous event which threw you among us. Tell me of it. Let us converse of familiar things in the old familiar language of the world which has so fearfully perished. Hey, hold on, we need a little hit. Most fearfully, fearfully, this is indeed no dream. Dreams no more. Was I much mourned, my Eiros? Mourned, Charmion? Oh, deeply. To that last hour of all there hung a cloud of intense gloom and devout sorrow over your household. Mourned, Charmion? Oh, I'm sorry, I did that line. And that last hour, speak of it. Remember that, beyond the naked fact of the catastrophe itself, I know nothing. When coming out from among mankind, I passed into night through the grave. At that period, if I remember aright, the calamity which overwhelmed you was utterly unanticipated. But indeed, I knew little of the speculative philosophy of the day. The individual calamity was, as you say, entirely unanticipated, but analogous misfortunes had been long a subject of discussion with astronomers. I need scarce tell you, my friend, that even when you left us, men had agreed to understand those passages in the most holy writings which speak of the final destruction of all things by fire, as having reference to the orb of the earth alone. But in regard to the immediate agency of the ruin, speculation had been at fault from that epoch in astronomical knowledge, in which the comets were divested of the terrors of flame. The very moderate density of those bodies had been well established. They had been observed to pass among the satellites of Jupiter without bringing about any sensible alteration either in the masses or in the orbits of these secondary planets. Imagine that. Okay, let's put you away, Mr. Moonrock, or we won't be able to focus. Enjoy that. Excusez-moi. Let's bring this somewhat closer, shall we? And I've lost a clip. We had long regarded the wanderers as vaporary creations of inconceivable tenuity, and as altogether incapable of doing injury to our substantial globe, even in the event of contact. But contact was not in any degree dreaded, for the elements of all the comets were accurately known. That among them we should look for the agency of the threatened fiery destruction had been for many years considered an inadmissible idea. But wonders and wild fancies had been, of late days, strangely rife among mankind, and although it was only with a few of the ignorant that actual apprehension prevailed upon the announcement by astronomers of a new comet, yet this announcement was generally received with I know not what kind of agitation and mistrust. The elements of the strange orb were immediately calculated, and it was at once conceded by all observers that its path at perihelion would bring it into very close proximity with the Earth. There were 2 or 3 astronomers of secondary note who resolutely maintained that a contact was inevitable. I cannot very well express to you the effect of this intelligence upon the people. For a few short days they would not believe an assertion which their intellect, so long employed among worldly considerations, could not in any manner grasp. But the truth of a vitally important fact soon makes its way into the understanding of even the most stolid. Finally, all men saw that astronomical knowledge lied not, and they awaited the comet. Its approach was not, at first, seemingly rapid, nor was its appearance of very unusual character. It was of a dull red, and had little perceptible train. For 7 or 8 days we saw no material increase in its apparent diameter, and but a partial alteration in its color. Meanwhile, the ordinary affairs of men were discarded, and all interest absorbed in a growing discussion instituted by the philosophic in respect to the cometary nature. Even the grossly ignorant aroused their sluggish capacities to such considerations. The learned now gave their intellect, their soul, to no such points as the allaying of fear or to the sustenance of loved theory. They sought, they panted for right views. They groaned for perfected knowledge. Truth arose in the purity of her strength and exceeding majesty, and the wise bowed down and adored. That material injury to our globe or to its inhabitants would result from the apprehended contact was an opinion which hourly lost ground among the wise, and the wise were now freely permitted to rule the reason and the fancy of the crowd. It was demonstrated that the density of the comet's nucleus was far less than that of our rarest gas, and the harmless passage of a similar visitor among the satellites of Jupiter was a point strongly insisted upon, and which served greatly to allay terror. Theologists, with an earnestness fear kindled, dwelt upon the biblical prophecies and expounded them to the people with a directness and simplicity of which no previous instance had been known. That the final destruction of the earth must be brought about by the agency of fire was urged with a spirit that must be that was enforced everywhere conviction, and that the comets were of no fiery nature, as all men now knew, was a truth which relieved all, in a great measure, from the apprehension of the great calamity foretold. It is noticeable that the popular prejudices and vulgar errors in regard to pestilences and wars, errors which were wont to prevail upon every appearance of a comet, were now altogether unknown, as if by some sudden convulsive exertion, reason had at once hurled superstition from her home. The feeblest intellect had derived vigor from the excessive interest. What minor evils might arise from the contact were points of elaborate question. The learned spoke of slight geological disturbances, of probable alterations in climate and consequently in vegetation, of possible magnetic and electric influences. Many held that no visible or perceptible effect would in any manner be produced. While such discussions were going on, their subject gradually approached, growing larger in apparent diameter and of a more brilliant luster. Mankind grew paler as it came. All human operations were suspended. There was an epoch in the course of the general sentiment when the comet had attained at length a size surpassing that of any previously recorded visitation. The people now, dismissing any lingering hope that the astronomers were wrong, experienced all the certainty of evil. Their chimerical aspect of their terror was gone. The hearts of the stoutest of our race beat violently within their bosoms. A very few days sufficed, however, to merge even such feelings in sentiments more unendurable. We could no longer apply to the strange orb any accustomed thoughts. Its historical attributes had disappeared. It oppressed us with a hideous novelty of emotion. We saw it not as an astronomical phenomenon in the heavens, but as an incubus upon our hearts and a shadow upon our brains. It had taken with inconceivable rapidity the character of a gigantic mantle of rare flame extending from horizon to horizon. Yet a day, and men breathed with greater freedom. It was clear that we were already within the influence of the comet, yet we lived. We even felt an unusual elasticity of frame and vivacity of mind. The exceeding tenuity of the object of our dread was apparent, for all heavenly objects were plainly visible through it. Meantime, our vegetation had perceptibly altered, and we gained faith from this predicted circumstance in the foresight of the wise. A wild luxuriance of foliage, utterly unknown before, burst out upon every vegetable thing. Yet another day, and the evil was not altogether upon us. It was now evident that its nucleus would first reach us. A wild change had come over all men, and the first sense of pain was the wild signal for general lamentation and horror. This first sense of pain lay in a rigorous constriction of the breast and lungs and an insufferable dryness of the skin. It could not be denied that our atmosphere was radically affected. The conformation of the atmosphere and the possible modifications to which it might be subjected were now the topics of discussion. The result of investigation sent an electric thrill of the interest terror through the universal heart of man. It had been long known that the air which encircled us was a compound of oxygen and nitrogen gases, in the proportion of 21 measures of oxygen and 79 of nitrogen, in every 100 of the atmosphere. Oxygen, which is the principle of combustion and the vehicle of heat, was absolutely necessary to the support of animal life and was the most powerful and energetic agent in nature. We read this. Shoot. And nitrogen, on the contrary, was incapable of supporting either animal life or flame. An unnatural excess of oxygen would result, it had been ascertained, in just such an elevation of the animal spirits as we had laterally experienced. It was the extension of the idea which had engendered awe. What would be the result of a total extraction of the nitrogen? A combustion irresistible, all-devouring, omniprevalent, immediate, the entire fulfillment in all their minute and terrible details of the fiery and horror-inspiring denunciations of the prophecies of the Holy Book. Damn. Why need I paint, Charmion, the now disenchained frenzy of mankind? That tenuity in the comet which had previously inspired us with hope was now the source of the bitterness of despair. In its impalpable gaseous character, we clearly perceived the consummation of fate. Meantime, a day again passed, bearing away with it the last shadow of hope. We gasped in the rapid modification of the air. The red blood bounded tumultuously through its strict channels. A furious delirium possessed all men, and with arms rigidly outstretched toward threatening heavens, they trembled and shrieked aloud. But the nucleus of the destroyer was now upon us, even here in Iden. I shudder while I speak. Let me be brief, brief as the ruin that overwhelmed. For a moment there was a wild, lurid light alone, visiting and penetrating all things. Then let us bow down, Charmion, before the excessive majesty of the great God. Then there came a shouting and pervading sound, as if from the mouth itself of him, while the whole incumbent mass of ether in which we existed burst at once into a species of intense flame, for whose surpassing brilliancy and all fervid heat even the angels in the high heaven of pure knowledge have no name. Thus ended all. Drop the fucking mic, yo! Does that sound like a Phoenix phenomenon to you? Because from where I'm sitting, kinda does. And I'm telling you what, I find that actually very encouraging. It is only 12:28, so, wow. Yeah, it seems to me as if this has been going on, or it's a program, and we're breaking the mofo. That's how we do it, baby. So, we're going to read the next in the list of the Platonic Dialogues, and that was listed as the power of words. So, I'm going to tip that way and try to get my book resituated. There's a lot going on here to hold my pages. It's kind of crazy. This is a very thick old volume. I'm really glad I found it. I found it in a thrift store for like $5 or something. And I don't know, I'll show you the book later. It's very nice. So, first, let me have another sip. Thank you. Thank you. That was a fun, dramatic read. I do have some theater in me. Oh, I gotta say. I love that stuff. Always have. Yay for dress up. Away with the fairies we go. Booyah. Oops. I dribbled. Okay. And here we go. Allow me to smoke again, though. That was so awesome. I just need to celebrate. No more of that moon rock, though. Man, that stuff. It's only for special moments. And that was special. That was fucking special. Damn it, man. Fucking timely, right? I've got coffee everywhere. I get so excited. So excited. Okay, make sure there's no coffee there because I like this sweater. I made it. The power of words. Oinos, pardon, agathos, the weakness of a spirit new-fledged with immortality. Agathos, you have spoken nothing, my oinos, for which pardon is to be demanded. Not even here is knowledge a thing of intuition. For wisdom, ask of the angels freely that it may be given. Oinos, but in this existence, I dreamed that I should be at once cognizant of all things, and thus at once be happy in being cognizant of all. Perhaps I should get the mask back out. Una momenta. That will make it easier for us all to follow along who's saying what. And because of that, I'm going to move my ashtray hither. Okay. So, for agathos, I will wear the mask. Ah, not in knowledge is happiness, but in the acquisition of knowledge. In forever knowing, we are forever blessed, but to know all were the curse of a fiend. But does not the Most High know all? That, since he is the most happy, must be still the one thing unknown even to him. But, since we grow hourly in knowledge, must not at last all things be known? Look down into the abysmal distances. Attempt to force the gaze down the multitudinous vistas of the stars as we sweep slowly through them thus and thus and thus. Even the spiritual vision, is it not at all points arrested by the continuous golden walls of the universe, the walls of the myriads of the shining bodies that mere number has appeared to blend into unity? I clearly perceive that the infinity of the matter is no dream. There are no dreams in Iden, but it is here whispered that of this infinity of matter, the sole purpose is to afford infinite springs at which the soul may allay the thirst to know which is forever unquenchable within it, since to quench it would be to extinguish the soul itself. Question me then, my oinos, freely and without fear. Come, we will leave to the left the loud harmony of the Pleiades, and swoop outward from the throne into the starry meadows beyond, Orion, where for pansies and violets and heart's ease are the beds of the triplicate and triple-tinted suns. And now, Agathos, as we proceed, instruct me. Speak to me in the earth's familiar tones. I understood not what you hinted to me just now of the nodes or of the methods of what, during mortality, we were accustomed to call creation. Do you mean to say that the Creator is not God? I mean to say that the deity does not create. Explain. In the beginning only he created. The seeming creatures which are now, throughout the universe, so perpetually springing into being, can only be considered as the mediate or indirect, not as the direct or immediate results of the divine creative power. Among men, my Agathos, this idea would be considered heretical in the extreme. Among angels, my Onos, it is seen to be simply true. I can comprehend you thus far that certain operations of what we term nature, or the natural laws, will, under certain condition, give rise to that which has all the appearance of creation. Shortly before the final overthrow of the earth, there were, I well remember, many very successful experiments in what some philosophers were weak enough to denominate the creation of animalcula. The cases of which you speak were, in fact, instances of the secondary creation, and of the only species of creation which has ever been, since the first word spoke into existence, the first law. Are not the starry worlds that form the abyss of non-entity burst hourly forth into the heavens? Are not the stars, Agathos, the immediate handiwork of the king? Let me endeavor, my Oinos, to lead you step by step to the conception I intend. Let me take a hit off this cigarette. This is some tense reading. But we will end by 1 o'clock because there's other stuff going on today. But I can't smoke and hold my page and be Agathos. I've only got actually the 2 hands. I strive for more. It's a little broken. Whoops. You are well aware that, as no thought can perish, so no act is without infinite result. We moved our hands, for example, when we were dwellers on the earth, and in so doing we gave vibration to the atmosphere which engirdled it. This vibration was indefinitely extended till it gave impulse to every particle of the earth's air, which thenceforward and forever was actuated by the one movement of the hand. This fact the mathematicians of our globe well know. They made the special effects, indeed, wrought in the fluid by special impulses, the subject of exact calculation, so that it became easy to determine in what precise period an impulse of given extent would engirdle the orb, and impress forever every atom of the atmosphere incumbent. Retrograding, they found no difficulty from a given effect under given conditions in determining the value of the original impulse. Now the mathematicians who saw that the results of any given impulse were absolutely endless, and who saw that a portion of these results were accurately traceable through the agency of algebraic analysis, who saw too the facility of the retrogradation, these men saw at the same time that this species of analysis itself had within itself a capacity for indefinite progress, that there were no bounds conceivable to its advancement and applicability except within the intellect of him who advanced or applied it. But at this point our mathematicians paused. And why, Agathos, they have proceeded? Because there were some considerations of deep interest beyond. It was deducible from what they knew that to a being of infinite understanding, one to whom the perfection of the algebraic analysis lay unfolded, there could be no difficulty in tracing every impulse given the air, and the ether through the air, to the remotest consequences at any even infinitely remote epoch of time. It is indeed demonstrable that every such impulse given the air must, in the end, impress every individual thing that exists within the universe, and the being of infinite understanding, the impulse, the being whom we have imagined, might trace the remote undulations of the impulse, trace them upward and onward in their influences upon all particles of all matter. upward and onward forever in their modifications of old forms, or in other words, in their creation of new, until he found them reflected, unimpressive at last, back from the throne of the Godhead. Damn. Okay. And not only could such a being do this, but at any epoch should a given result be afforded him, should one of these numberless comets, for example, be presented to his inspection, he could have no difficulty in determining by the analytic retrogradation to what original impulse it was due. This power of retrogradation in its absolute fullness and perfection, this faculty of referring at all epochs all effects to all causes, is of course the prerogative of the deity alone, but in every variation of degree, short of the absolute perfection, is the power itself exercised by the whole host of the angelic intelligences. But you speak merely of impulses upon the air. In speaking of the air, I referred only to the earth, but the general proposition has reference to impulses upon the ether, which, since it pervades and alone pervades all space, is thus the great medium of creation. Then all motion, of whatever nature, creates? It must. But a true philosophy has long taught that the source of all motion is thought, and the source of all thought is God. I have spoken to you, Oinos, as to a child of the fair earth which lately perished, of impulses upon the atmosphere of the earth. You did. And while I thus spoke, did there not cross your mind some thought of the physical power of words? Is not every word an impulse on the air? But why, Agathos, do you weep? And why, oh why, do your wings droop as we hover above this fair star, which is the greenest and yet most terrible of all we have encountered in our flight? Its brilliant flowers look like fairy dream, but its fierce volcanoes like the passions of a turbulent heart. They are, this wild star. It is now 3 centuries since, with clasped hands and with streaming eyes, at the feet of my beloved, I spoke it with a few passionate sentences into birth. Its brilliant flowers are the dearest of all unfulfilled dreams, and its raging volcanoes are the passions of the most turbulent and unhallowed of hearts. That was the end of story number 2, The Power of Words, and it was just lovely as well. Damn! And we're talking about the destruction of the earth again, and they're, describing that whole conflagration bit there. Enjoy. I was really impressed by that, man. Fucking timely. 1243, the Colloquy of Monos and Una is it's doable. It's doable, but we may not read Al-Aaraaf today. I think it is the 4th and final of these conversations, so I may add it to the beginning of the next Poe stream. But we'll begin the Colloquy of Monos and Una, and I will end the stream probably on the hour or 5 or 10 minutes thereafter. An hour is enough. My throat is dry. Let's have a sip. Let's see if we can get that mask back in the hand better. Oh, that posture will work well. We'll just go up and down. The Colloquy of Monos and Una. These things are in the near future. I will be Una, This will be Manos. Born again? Yes, fairest and most beloved Una, born again. These were the words upon whose mystical meaning I had so long pondered, rejecting the explanation of the priesthood until Death himself resolved for me the secret. Death? How strangely, sweet Una, you echo my words. I observe, too, a vacillation in your step, a joyous inquietude in your eyes. You are confused and oppressed by the majestic novelty of the life eternal. Yes, it was of death I spoke, and hear how singularly sounds that word, which of old was wont to bring terror to all hearts, throwing a mildew upon all pleasures. Ah, death, the spectre which sate at all feasts! How often, Manos, did we lose ourselves in speculation upon its nature? How mysteriously did it act as a check to human bliss, saying unto it, thus far and no farther? That earnest mutual love, my own Manos, which burned within our bosoms, how vainly did we flatter ourselves, feeling happy in its first upspringing, that our happiness would strengthen with its strength. Alas, as it grew, so grew in our hearts the dread of that evil hour which was hurrying to separate us forever. Thus in time it became painful to love. Hate would have been mercy then. Speak not here of these griefs, dear Una, mine forever now. But the memory of past sorrow, is it not present joy? I have much to say yet of the things which have been. Above all, I burn to know the incidents of your own passage through the dark valley and shadow. And when did the radiant Una ask anything of her Manos in vain? I will be minute in relating all, but at what point shall the weird narrative begin? At what point? You have said, Manos, I comprehend you. In death we have both learned the propensity of man to define the indefinable. I will not say then, commence with the moments of life's cessation, but commence with that sad, sad instant when, the fever having abandoned you, you sank into a breathless and motionless torpor, and I pressed down your pallid eyelids with the passionate fingers of love. One word first, my Una, in regard to man's general condition at this epoch. You will remember that one or two of the wise among our forefathers, wise in fact, although not in the world's esteem, had ventured to doubt the propriety of the term improvement, as applied to the progress of our civilization. There were periods in each of the 5 or 6 centuries immediately preceding our dissolution, when arose some vigorous intellect, boldly contending for those principles whose truth appears now, to our disenfranchised reason, so utterly obvious, principles which should have taught our race to submit to the guidance of the natural laws, rather than to attempt their control. At long intervals, some masterminds appeared, looking upon each advance in practical science as a retrogradation in the true utility. Occasionally, the poetic intellect, that intellect which we now feel to have been the most exalted of all, since those truths to us were of the most enduring importance and could only be reached by that analogy which speaks in proof tones to the imagination alone, and to the unaided reason bears no weight. Occasionally did this poetic intellect proceed a step farther in the evolving of the vague idea of the philosophic, and find in the mystic parable that tells of the tree of knowledge and of its forbidden fruit, death-producing, a distinct intimation that knowledge was not meet for man in the infant condition of his soul. And these men, the poets, living and perishing amid the scorn of the utilitarians, of rough pedants, who arrogated themselves a title which could have been properly applied only to the scorned. These men, the poets, ponder piningly, yet not unwisely, upon the ancient days when our wants were not more simple than our enjoyments were keen, days when mirth was a word unknown, so solemnly deep-toned was happiness. Holy, august, and blissful days when blue rivers ran undammed between hills unhewn into far forest solitudes primeval, odorous, and unexplored. Yet these noble exceptions from the general misrule served but to strengthen it by opposition. Alas, we had fallen upon the most evil of all evil days. The great movement, that was the cant term, went on. A diseased commotion, moral and physical. Art, the arts, arose supreme and once enthroned, cast chains upon the intellects which had elevated them to power. Man, because he could not but acknowledge the majesty of nature, fell into childish exultation at his acquired and still increasing dominion over her elements. Even while he stalked a god in his own fancy, an infantine imbecility came over him. As might be supposed from the origin of his disorder, he grew infected with system and with abstraction. He enwrapped himself in generalities. Among other odd ideas, that of universal equality gained ground, and in the face of analogy and of God, in despite of the loud warning of the laws of gradation so visibly pervading all things in earth and heaven, wild attempts at an omniprevalent democracy were made. Yet this evil sprang necessarily from the leading evil, knowledge. Man could not both know and succumb. Meantime, huge smoking cities arose innumerable. Green leaves shrank before the hot breath of furnaces. The fair face of nature was deformed as with the ravages of some loathsome disease. And methinks, sweet Una, even our slumbering sense of the forced and of the far-fetched might have been arrested us here. But now it appears that we had worked out our own destruction in the perversion of our taste, or rather in the blind neglect of its culture in the schools. For in truth, it was at this crisis that taste alone, that faculty which holding a middle position between the pure intellect and the moral sense, could never satisfy, have been disregarded. It was now that taste alone could have led us gently back to beauty, to nature, and to life. But alas for the power of contemplative spirit and majestic intuition of Plato. Alas for there's a word here in Greek, which he justly regarded as an all-sufficient education for the soul. Alas for him and for it, since both were most desperately needed when we both were most entirely forgotten or despised. Oh, truly, just a minute here. Born again, and now it is fairest and dearest. Experience so many ages discovered. I won't read the footnotes. I'm going to skip it and continue on with Manos. Pascal, a philosopher whom we both love, has said, how truly... it's in French. And it is not impossible that the sentiment of the natural, had time permitted it, would have regained its old ascendancy over the harsh mathematical reason of the schools. But this thing was not to be. Prematurely induced by impertinence of knowledge, the old age of the world drew on. This the mass of mankind saw not, or, living lustily although unhappily, affected not to see. But for myself, the earth's records had taught me to look for widest ruin as the price of highest civilization. I had imbibed a prescience of our fate from comparison of China, the simple and enduring, with Assyria, the architect, with Egypt, the astrologer, with Nubia, more crafty than either, the turbulent mother of all arts. In history of these regions, I met with a ray from the future. The individual artificialities of the three latter were local diseases of the earth, and in their individual overthrows we had seen local remedies applied, but for the infected world at large I could anticipate no regeneration save in death. That man, as a race, should not become extinct, I saw that he must be born again. And now it was, fairest and dearest, that we wrapped our spirits daily in dreams. Now it was that in twilight we discoursed of the days to come, when the art-scarred surface of the earth, having undergone that purification which alone could efface its rectangular obscenities, should clothe itself anew in the verdure and the mountain slopes and the smiling waters of paradise, and be rendered at length a fit dwelling place for man, the death purged, for man to whose now exalted intellect there should be poison in knowledge no more, for the redeemed, regenerated, blissful, and now immortal, but still for the material man. That's fucking beautiful. Oh my god. That's why I like to read these live. Oh, that just gave me chills. Oh, the vapors. That's lovely. And yes, I believe we can finish. Oh my. Well, do I remember these conversations, dear Manos? But the epoch of the fiery overthrow was not so near at hand as we believed, and as the corruption you indicate did surely warrant us in believing. Men lived and died individually. You yourself sickened and passed into the grave, and thither your constant Una speedily followed you. And though the century which has since elapsed, and whose conclusion brings us thus together once more, tortured our slumbering senses with no impatience of duration, yet, my Manos, it was a century still. Say rather, a point in the vague infinity, unquestionably. It was in the earth's dotage that I died, wearied at the heart with anxieties which had their origin in the general turmoil and decay. I succumbed to the fierce fever. After some days of pain and many dreamy delirium replete with ecstasy, the manifestations of which you mistook for pain, while I longed but was impotent to undeceive you, after some days there came upon me, as you have said, a breathless and motionless torpor, and this was termed death by those who stood around me. God, that's long. Words are vague things. My condition did not deprive me of sentience. It appeared to me not greatly dissimilar to the extreme quiescence of him who, having slumbered long and profoundly, lying motionless and fully prostrate in a midsummer noon, begins to steal slowly back into consciousness through the mere sufficiency of his sleep, and without being awakened by external disturbances. I breathed no longer. The pulses were still. The heart had ceased to beat. Volition had not departed, but was powerless. The senses were unusually active, although eccentrically so, assuming often each other's functions at random. The taste and the smell were inextricably confounded, and became one sentiment, abnormal and intense. The rose water with which your tenderness had moistened my lips to the last affected me with sweet fancies of flowers, fantastic flowers far more lovely than any of the old earth, but whose prototype we have here blooming around us. The eyelids, transparent and bloodless, offered no complete impediment to vision. As volition was in abeyance, the balls could not roll in their sockets, but all objects within the range of the visual hemisphere were seen with more or less distinctness. The rays which fell upon the external retina or into the corner of the eye, producing a more vivid effect than those which struck the front or anterior surface. Yet in the former instance, this effect was so far anomalous that I appreciated only as sound, sweet or discordant as the matters presenting themselves at my side were light or dark in shade, curved or angling in outline. The hearing at the same time, although excited in degree, was not irregular in action, estimating real sounds with an extravagance of precision, not less than of sensibility. Touch had undergone a modification more peculiar. Its impressions were tardily received, but pertinaciously retained, and resulted always in the highest physical pleasure. Thus, the pleasure of your sweet fingers upon my eyelids, at first only recognized through vision, at length, long after their removal, filled my whole being with a sensual delight immeasurable. I say with a sensual delight. All my perceptions were purely sensual. The materials furnished the passive brain by the senses were not in the least degree wrought into shape by the deceased understanding. Of pain there was some little, of pleasure there was very much, but of moral pain or pleasure none at all. Thus your wild sobs floated into my ear with all their mournful cadences, and were appreciated in their every variation of sad tone. But they were soft musical sounds and no more. They conveyed to the extinct reason no intimation of the sorrows which gave them birth, while the large and constant tears which fell upon my face, telling the bystanders of a heart which broke, thrilled every fiber of my frame with ecstasy alone. And this was the truth, the death of which these bystanders spoke reverently in low whispers, you, sweet Una, gaspingly with loud cries. They attired me for the coffin, 3 or 4 dark figures which fitted busily to and fro. As these crossed the direct line of my vision, they affected me as forms, but upon passing to my side, their images impressed me with the idea of shrieks, groans, and other dismal expressions of terror, of horror, or of woe. You alone, habited in a white robe, passed in all directions musically about me. The day waned, and as its light faded away, I became possessed by a vague uneasiness, an anxiety which as the sleeper feels when sad real sounds fall continuously within his ear, low distant bell tones, solemn, at long but equal intervals, and commingling with melancholy dreams. Night arrived, and with its shadows, a heavy discomfort. It oppressed my limbs with the oppression of some dull weight, and was palpable. There was also a moaning sound, not unlike the distant reverberation of surf, but more continuous, which, beginning with the first twilight, had grown in strength with the darkness. Suddenly lights were brought into the room, and this reverberation became forthwith interrupted into frequent unequal bursts of the same sound, but less dreary and less distinct. The ponderous oppression was in a great measure relieved, and issuing from the flame of each lamp, for there were many, there flowed unbrokenly into my ears a strain of melodious monotone. And when now, dear Una, approaching the bed upon which I lay outstretched, you sat gently by my side, breathing odor from your sweet lips and pressing them upon my brow, there arose tremulously within my bosom and mingling with the merely physical sensations which circumstances had called forth, a something akin to sentiment itself, a feeling that, half appreciating, half responded to your earnest love and sorrow, but this feeling took no root in the pulseless heart, and seemed indeed rather a shadow than a reality, and faded quickly away, first into extreme quiescence, and then into a purely sensual pleasure as before. And now, from the wreck of the chaos of the usual senses, there appeared to have arisen within me a sixth, all perfect. In its exercise I found a wild delight, yet a delight still physical, inasmuch as the understanding in it had no part. Motion in the animal frame had fully ceased, no muscle quivered, no nerve thrilled, no artery throbbed. But there seemed to have sprung up in the brain that of which no words could convey to the merely human intelligence even an indistinct conception. Let me term it a mental pendulous pulsation. It was a moral embodiment of man's abstract idea of time. By the absolute equalization of this movement, or of such as this, had the cycles of the firmamental orbs themselves been adjusted. By its aid, I measured the irregularities of the clock upon the mantel and of the watches of the attendants. Their tickings came sonorously to my ears, the slightest deviation from the true proportion, and these deviations were omniprevalent, affected me as violations of abstract truth are wont, on earth, to affect the moral sense. Although no two of the timepieces in the chamber struck individual seconds accurately together, yet I had no difficulty in holding steadily in mind the tones, and the respective momentary errors of each. And this keen, perfect, self-existing sentiment of duration, this sentiment existing, as man could not possibly have conceived it to exist, independently of any succession of events, This idea, this sixth sense, unsurprisingly from the ashes of the rest, was the first obvious and certain step of the intemporal soul upon the threshold of the temporal eternity. We're almost done. This is the last couple paragraphs. It was midnight, and you still sat by my side. All others had departed from the chamber of death. They had deposited me in the coffin. The lamps burned flickeringly, for this I knew by the tremulousness of the monotonous strains. But suddenly these strains diminished in distinctness and in volume. Finally they ceased. The perfume in my nostrils died away. Forms affected my vision no longer. The oppression of the darkness uplifted itself from my bosom. A dull shock like that of electricity pervaded my frame and was followed by total loss of the idea of contact. All of what man has termed sense was merged in the sole consciousness of entity, and in the one abiding sentiment of duration. The mortal body had been at length stricken with the hand of the deadly decay. Yet had not all of sentience departed, for the consciousness and the sentiment remaining supplied some of its functions by a lethargic intuition. I appreciated the direful change now in operation upon the flesh, and as the dreamer is sometimes aware of the bodily presence of one who leans over him, so, sweet Una, I still dully felt that you sat by my side. So, too, when the noon of the second day came, I was not unconscious of those movements which displaced you from my side, which confined me within the coffin, which deposited me within the hearse, which bore me to the grave, which lowered me into it, which heaped heavily the mold upon me, and which thus left me, in blackness and corruption, to my sad and solemn slumbers, the worm. And here in the prison house, which has few secrets to disclose, there rolled away days and weeks and months, and the soul watched narrowly each second as it flew, and without effort took record of its flight, without effort and without object. A year passed. The consciousness of being had grown hourly more indistinct, and that of mere locality had, in great measure, usurped its position. The idea of entity was becoming merged in that of place. The narrow space immediately surrounding what had been the body was now going to be the body itself. At length, as often happens to the sleeper, by sleep, and its world alone is death imaged. At length, as sometimes happened on earth to the deep slumberer, when some flitting light half startled him into awaking, yet left him half enveloped in dreams, so to me, in the strict embrace of the shadow, came that light which alone might have power to startle, the light of enduring love. Men toiled at the grave in which I lay darkling. They upthrew the damp earth. Upon my moldering bones there descended the coffin of Una. And now again all was void. That nebulous light had been extinguished. That feeble thrill had vibrated itself into quiescence. Many lustra had supervened. Dust had returned to dust. The worm had food no more. The sense of being had at length utterly departed, and there reigned in its stead of all things, dominant and perpetual, the autocrat's place and time, for that which was not, for that which had no form, for that which had no thought, for that which had no sentience, for that which was soulless, yet of which matter formed no portion. For all this nothingness, yet for all this immortality, the grave was still a home, and the corrosive hours co-mates. Whew! Damn. That was heavy reading. It was a difficult read. I enjoyed it. The mask helped. I may use that as a mechanism more often. We are going to postpone the reading of the final of the 4 Platonic dialogues titled Al-Aaraaf, which is more of a poetic verse. I will pick that up another day and include further works of Poe, maybe I'll be led to something that is further relevant, like the many musings here on the gaseous destruction and electrical discharge of the atmosphere around us and crazy shit. So, I'm done. I love you guys. Thank you all for showing up. 007, just JP, Tony's Coffee House. And me, Tinfoil Teapotty. So, I will see you all soon for our viewing party. Much love. And have a wonderful, wonderful